Chapter 1: The House by the Shore. The house was just a skeleton when I first saw it. A bare structure of pale wood and steel, framed against the wide, salt-colored sky. Half-finished, wind-stained, and silent, it stood like a question mark at the edge of the world, looking out toward the sea as if waiting for someone to complete the sentence. I hadn't planned on coming back here, but grief does strange things. It reshapes your steps when you least expect it. It brings you to doorways you didn't know you were building toward. So here I was, a woman with too many blueprints in her bag and not enough direction in her heart, standing in front of a half-built house by the shore. And strangely, I didn't feel lost. I felt quiet, like something inside me had finally found the space to breathe. The town was called Crescent Bay, a name too poetic for how small and unremarkable it seemed at first glance. A single street of cafes, a library that smelled of sea air and dust, a grocer's shop with chipped paint and polite silence. But it had rhythm, the kind of rhythm that grows slowly like moss. Old women sat outside knitting and watching the waves as if they were family. Teenagers with surfboards and too much confidence passed me on bikes. And somewhere between the tide and the cliffs, I could feel stories buried like shells in the sand. I rented a small cottage at the edge of town, faded shutters, creaky floorboards, a garden grown wild with lavender and thyme. It was perfect. The project the house I had come to finish was his idea. My brother, Luca. It was supposed to be his dream, a home by the sea where he could paint in the mornings and play jazz records at night. He had drawn the first plans himself, messy and full of hope. Then war came, and he didn't. After he was gone, I found the folder labeled Crescent Bay Project buried in his studio. I knew I had to finish it, not just for him, but for the part of me that still believed in something like peace. So I contacted the contractor, flew down from the city, opened Luca's old sketchbooks, and told myself I could do it. Even though I wasn't sure, I still knew how to build anything that wasn't broken. The first meeting, he was already there when I arrived at the site that morning, tall, still, with weathered hands and shoulders like stone. I didn't hear him come up behind me, only felt the shift in the wind. "You're not from here," he said. His voice was low, rough like granite under the waves. "No," I replied, "but this house will be." He didn't smile. "Architect?" he asked. I nodded. "Sophia Marin." He hesitated, then extended a hand. "Elias Thorne." It was a strong handshake, but not forced. Like he'd had years of learning when to hold and when to let go. Something about him there was something about him I couldn't place. He looked young, but older than the ocean somehow. Like time had touched him differently. His eyes were the color of driftwood, and they didn't flinch when they looked at you. Later, I'd learn he was a former soldier. Later, I'd learn he came back from the war with more scars than stories. But that morning, all I knew was that he carried stillness like armor, and that for some reason, it made me feel safe. Notes and nails. We spent the day going over Luca's blueprints. Elias barely spoke. He moved through the unfinished house like he already knew its bones, measuring, assessing, running his fingers along the beams. "Your brother knew how to dream," he said finally. "Yes," I whispered, "but I have to make it real." He glanced at me then, and there was something in his face, something like understanding, or maybe just silence shaped like compassion. "Then we build it slow," he said. And right, that evening, I sat on the porch of the cottage that night with a cup of tea, watching the light fade over the water. In the distance, I could hear the ocean breathing, in, out, and somewhere beyond the sound of the waves, I thought about Elias, about the quiet in him that mirrored the quiet in me. I didn't know then that we would become something more than strangers. Didn't know that over the next weeks and months, we would rebuild not just a house, but pieces of each other. But I knew, in the gentle hush of that first night, that something had shifted, and I let it. Chapter 2: Tea with Salted Wind. It started with rain, not the soft, romantic kind you read about, but real coastal rain, blown sideways by wind, biting through fabric and soaking through to the skin. One moment the sky was blue. The next, it cracked open like an old promise. I hadn't brought an umbrella. Just my leather sketchbook and a scarf too thin for weather like this. By the time I reached the center of town, I was half shivering, half laughing, my boots squelching with every step. Most shops had already shuttered for the storm. Even the library was dark, but one light was still glowing through fogged-up windows at the corner of the street. A weather-worn sign above the door read, "The Lighthouse Cafe." I stepped inside. The cafe. It smelled like citrus peels and cinnamon, small, warm, wooden, shelves of mismatched mugs, chalkboard menus, a cracked record playing Billie Holiday in the background. The only person behind the counter was an older woman with sea-gray curls and eyes that said she'd seen everything and forgiven most of it. "Storm caught you," she said, not unkindly. I underestimated it. She gave a small chuckle. "That's the sea for you." I ordered tea, black with honey, and then turned and froze. He was there, Elias, sitting at a corner table near the back, coat draped over the empty chair across from him, a book open in his hands. He looked up when I stepped in, rain still clinging to my lashes. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. I hesitated, then made my way slowly across the cafe, tea in hand. "Do you mind?" I asked, motioning to the seat. He closed the book, nodded once. "No one else is foolish enough to be out in this. Then we're both fools," I said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement maybe, or recognition, shared silence. We didn't speak for a while, just sipped from our mugs, listening to the rain drum against the windows, Billy crooning something about the moon and heartbreak. There was something strangely comfortable in the silence, like the way some songs don't need lyrics to move you. I watched the way Elias held his cup, carefully, deliberately, like he was used to handling fragile things. He watched the storm, like he'd seen worse, and didn't flinch anymore. The conversation begins after a while. I asked, "What were you reading?" He glanced down at the cover. Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet. I raised a brow. "Didn't take you for the poetic type." "Most people don't," he said evenly. "You're hard to read," I said. "And you're not?" I smiled into my cup. Touché, a little more. We talked not about anything big. Favorite books, tea preferences, the bakery that only opens on Thursdays, how the sea changes color depending on your mood. I told him I was struggling with one of Luca's wall designs. He offered to help, then added, "Only if you make me coffee." I agreed, not because I needed help, but because something in me already wanted reasons to see him again. When the storm broke, by the time the clouds cleared, the town was slick and shining under the weight of rain. We stepped out into the gray gold light. "I live just past the dunes," he said, motioning north. "Old lighthouse keeper's cottage." I nodded. "I'm in the cottage with the red shutters." "I know it," he said. "The garden's wild." Like me, I smiled. He didn't laugh, but I saw his eyes soften. And then he said, so quietly I almost missed it, not wild, "Alive." It stunned me, the way he said it, like it meant something. Then he nodded once and disappeared down the street. That night, back home, I lit candles, the kind that smelled like pine and earth. Luca's blueprints were spread out on the floor, notes scribbled in pencil, some pages crumpled at the corners. I didn't fix anything, just sat with them, letting them be incomplete, letting myself be too. Outside, the sea moved like breath, and somewhere in the town, a man who drank his tea slow and read Rilke by candlelight had said something that stayed in my chest like heat, not wild. Alive. Chapter 3. The Wall Between Us. The wall wouldn't hold. It was a minor load-bearing partition on the northern side of the house, one Luca had sketched with more heart than engineering sense. It was crooked, misaligned, refused to connect with the beam above it no matter how I tried to redraw it. I could have called the site foreman, could have asked for another contractor, but my hand reached for the phone and texted Elias instead. "Wall's giving me a hard time." Still up for that coffee and help? A minute passed. Then 2. Be there in 20. Black, no sugar. Arrival, he came walking down the path with steady steps, sleeves rolled up, toolbox in hand. There was something calming about the way he moved, like he didn't rush for anything unless it truly mattered. I handed him the mug as he stepped onto the porch. Thanks, he said simply. Then he looked at the house as if he were greeting it. We didn't speak again until we were standing in front of the wall. This part, I said, tapping the support beam, is off by about 6 millimeters. He crouched to look closer. 7, he corrected. I smiled. You're thorough, you're stubborn. Working side by side. We worked in tandem. He held the frame. I drilled. We argued over angles, over tension points. Dust rose in sunlight like golden breath. He didn't hover or correct. He let me try things, or let me lead, until I asked for his hand. We moved quietly, like we'd done this before in another life. And as the wall slowly began to shift into place, I noticed how close we were standing. Shoulder to shoulder, breath brushing breath. It startled me, not because it was too much, but because it wasn't. A small slip. At one point, I dropped the pencil I'd tucked behind my ear. We both reached down to grab it, our hands grazing in the air between us. I froze. So did he. The moment was nothing, and yet not nothing. We stood. Neither of us spoke. Then he turned back to the frame. The wall's fine now, he said quietly. And I wondered, was he talking about the one we built or the one between us? The break. We sat on the porch afterward. The sea was quieter today, distant and soft like a lullaby hummed through stone. I haven't done this kind of work in a while, Elias said, his voice low. What kind did you do? He hesitated. Then, shelters, outposts, safe houses. I looked at him. Military? He nodded once. And before that, he said slowly. I was just trying to outrun things. The way he said it made me think the running wasn't over yet. I didn't press. I just offered him another sip of coffee. A shift. As we watched the horizon together, he asked suddenly, why this house? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the frame behind us, the shape of Luca's dream becoming real, beam by beam. My brother didn't come back, I said softly. But this house, it's the only thing he left that wasn't broken. Elias didn't speak, but he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small round stone, smooth and gray-blue like the sea, and handed it to me. Heavy for its size, he murmured. I turned it in my palm. Why give it to me? Because you carry too much already. The walk home when he left, he didn't say goodbye, just nodded once and walked back toward the road, shadows stretching long behind him. I watched until he disappeared into the pines. The stone still sat in my palm, and in that quiet ache I hadn't named yet, I realized I didn't want to know everything about him. I just wanted him to keep showing up. That night I placed the stone on my windowsill. Let the moonlight catch it, let the wind speak against the glass. The wall was standing now, sturdy, aligned, true, but there were other walls, still shifting, some between us, some inside us, and maybe, just maybe, we were learning how to open the first crack in them, together. Chapter 4, Her Sketches, His Silence. The next morning I woke before the sun, the kind of gray-blue dawn that leaks slowly across the sky, soft as a breath. The sea hadn't started moving yet. It rested like glass, and for once, so did I. I made coffee in silence, watched steam curl from the mug like a prayer, then rolled out the blueprints across the kitchen table. Luca's lines, my edits, our contradictions. I stared at the sketch of the second floor. The studio facing the sea, the mezzanine without railings, the sunroom that had no clear purpose except to let light in. It was unfinished, both literally and in the way that meant something deeper. There were margins where I hadn't drawn anything at all. The invitation. At noon, I sent Elias a message. If you're not doing anything dangerous, I could use a second pair of eyes on the plans. He replied a few minutes later, Only danger today is splinters. Be there in 10. When he arrived, he didn't knock, just tapped gently on the frame of the open door. Still standing, he said, nodding toward the wall we'd fixed yesterday. For now, he stepped in, the floor creaking under his boots. I motioned to the table. He looked down, paused. He trailed off. I waited. He ran his hand across the edge of the sketch paper, as if touching it mattered more than speaking about it. These aren't just plans, he said finally. They're memories. The reading of lines. I watched him study them, his brow knit, his fingers tracing every corridor, every impossible window, every choice Luca had made without explaining why. What do you see? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then I see someone who wanted light, someone who didn't believe in walls. I swallowed. That was Luca. But I also see corrections, he said, tapping his finger where my notes had rewritten parts of the studio. Someone trying to make it real. That's me. And do you want it real? He asked. I looked at him. I want it finished. The moment in the sketches. He found something I hadn't noticed before. A small symbol, barely visible, penciled into the corner of the sunroom window. A circle within a square. Luca's personal mark. He only used it on pieces he considered complete. I didn't think he ever finished the design for this room, I whispered. Maybe he didn't need to, Elias said. Why not? He met my eyes. Because it was always meant for you. The air shifted. I couldn't tell if it was wind or feeling. I sat down slowly, pressing my hands flat to the table as if to hold myself still. A quiet shift. After that, we worked without speaking for nearly an hour, sketching, redrawing, discussing load angles and sun placement, but it felt different. He wasn't just helping. He was building with me. At one point, I looked up and caught him watching me, not staring, not intense, just seeing me. I blinked. What? He shook his head. Nothing. You just make it easy to forget the world isn't always kind. The room fell very quiet after that, a confession half spoken. As he packed his tools to leave, I said, without meaning to, I used to be engaged. He paused, waited. He was an engineer, I said, still not looking at him. Built perfect houses, glass walls, no softness, no place to breathe. And he didn't love the way I dreamed. Silence. Then softly, I'm sorry. I shook my head. Don't be. If he had, I wouldn't be here. He stepped closer then, just a little, not touching, but present, more than enough. The departure as he reached the doorway, he paused. Keep the sunroom, he said, just as it is. I nodded. You think it'll stand? He smiled, the faintest curve of his mouth, like something blooming in winter. With the right hands, he said, everything can. Then he was gone. That night, I lit candles again, not because I needed light, but because I wanted to sit in something soft. The house breathed around me, unfinished, yes, but full of someone else's faith, and now maybe my own. I took out a new sheet of sketch paper, and in the corner, where only I would see it, I drew a tiny circle inside a square. A quiet promise to finish something, not just the house, but the version of me that believed in home again. Chapter 5, A Story in the Sand. It started as a cleanup day. The town did it every few months, a kind of quiet ritual like brushing hair from an old woman's brow. Locals gathered near the shoreline with gloves and buckets and the kind of worn humor that only comes from living near salt too long. I hadn't planned to go, but when I passed the bakery, the owner, a man named Tomas with hands like rolling pins, called out, "Architect, we need more creative eyes on the trash." So I joined, a canvas tote on my shoulder, gloves too big, hair pulled back in a haphazard twist. The kind of day you don't expect anything from. And yet, there he was. Elias on the shore. He wasn't wearing his usual work jacket, just a navy shirt with the sleeves rolled, collar slightly frayed, and boots that looked as though they'd crossed more than sand. I spotted him near the old pier, lifting a rusted net out of the water, moving with that same quiet precision he always had, like the ocean asked permission to exist around him. He saw me and nodded. No words, not yet, but enough. The sketch in the driftwood. I found it half buried beneath a broken plank. A piece of paper, weathered and creased, folded around something heavier. I crouched down, pried it loose, and gasped. It was Luca's handwriting, his signature sketch lines, a concept for a sculpture that was never built. Swirling metal, light-filled glass, and a base shaped like a spiral wave. He had called it Tide. Inside the fold, a smooth piece of sea glass had been tucked, deep teal, worn by water and time. I sat on the sand and stared at it for a long while. Elias approaches. He must have seen my stillness from across the beach, because suddenly he was beside me, crouching low. "What is it?" he asked. I handed him the paper. He didn't say anything at first. Then he designed this? I nodded. Before he stopped drawing anything except buildings. Elias touched the edge of the paper. So gently I wondered if he thought it would break. He was good, he said softly. He was full of things he never got to finish. I looked at the sea glass in my hand. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just chasing all the versions of him that never got to exist. Elias was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Maybe you're not chasing him. Maybe you're finishing the version of yourself you started before he left." I looked at him, and it felt like the tide went out of my lungs. The story he told. We sat in the sand after that. No one bothered us. The cleanup day faded into background noise. Then Elias spoke. I was stationed near a small village once. Mountains behind us. Fields that looked like someone had painted them. He didn't look at me as he spoke. There was a boy there, 8, maybe 9. He used to draw maps in the dirt with a stick. Swirls and cities, oceans and stars. One day he gave me one. Said it was for when I got lost. I didn't move. He was gone the next week. Just gone. Silence stretched between us, and then, almost brokenly, I forgot the map. Left it behind when we evacuated. I've forgotten a lot of things, but I still remember that line he drew for the river. It curved like a question mark. He looked down. I don't know why I told you that. I do, I said. He glanced up. Because you've never stopped walking through that map. The sea between. The waves rolled in closer. One licked the edge of my boot. I didn't pull away. Elias reached for the sea glass in my palm. I let him. He held it up to the light. You ever notice how glass becomes beautiful only after it's broken? I looked at him. Is that what you think we are? Maybe, he said. Not broken, just softened by time, by storm. He handed it back to me. Our fingers touched again. And this time, neither of us moved away. Walking back. We didn't talk on the walk home, just walked in parallel silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The sky was turning rose-colored above the sea, and when we reached my gate, he paused. Thank you, he said. For what? For letting me tell a story I hadn't said out loud before. I looked at him, something warm and aching in my chest. Thank you for not walking away. That night I pressed Luca's sketch flat under glass, hung it above my bed, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Then I placed the sea glass on the nightstand, a small softened shard of something that had once been sharp, and I whispered a quiet truth into the dark. I think I'm beginning to believe in kindness again. Chapter 6, Letters Never Sent. It started with the sound of drawers opening. We were at Elias's cottage, the old lighthouse keeper's house, nestled beyond the dunes, where the salt lived in the walls and the floors creaked with memory. The sun had gone down. Dinner had been simple, roasted vegetables, bread, wine poured without discussion. We'd fallen into the kind of comfort where silence wasn't absence. He had gone to find a screwdriver. Instead, he returned with a box. The box. It was wooden, scarred, hinges rusted in places. He held it like it was heavier than it looked. I wasn't going to show you this, he said, setting it down on the table. You don't have to. I know. But he opened it anyway. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some folded neatly, others torn at the edges, ink bleeding in places, all addressed to no one, or maybe to the void. He didn't look at me when he said, "They're not beautiful, just honest." What was inside? I reached in slowly. The paper was thin, aged, the kind that feels like it might fall apart in your hands if you don't hold it with kindness. The first letter I unfolded wasn't dated. It began, "Today I saw a bird land in the middle of a minefield and fly away untouched. I wondered if that's grace or just luck, or maybe it's the same thing." I stopped reading, looked up. He was staring at the fire. "Why didn't you send them?" I asked. He shrugged. "Who would want them? I would..." "Permission." He nodded once, and I read. I read until the fire died low and the room smelled like cedar and ash, letter after letter. Some were just fragments. I missed the sound of forks on plates. I miss footsteps that aren't in boots. There's a boy here who still draws on walls with charcoal. I gave him my extra gloves. I don't think I'm afraid of dying. I think I'm afraid no one will remember I was here. One ended with only this line, "My hands shake now," not from fear, but from holding too much. Silence between us. I didn't cry, but something inside me felt waterlogged, like emotion had risen without spilling. "You never let anyone read them before?" I asked. "No." "Why now?" He turned to me, finally meeting my eyes. "Because you don't try to fix things. You just let them be what they are." And in that moment, I think he gave me more than his words. He gave me his permission to stay, a shared letter. There was one letter on blue paper, folded tighter than the rest. He handed it to me slowly. This one, I wrote after we lost someone. I took it with reverence. It read, "We called him Sparrow. He was always humming. Said it kept the ghosts out of his lungs. He died without a sound, and afterward the silence felt like it belonged to him. Sometimes I still hear his humming in quiet places. Maybe that's how people stay, not in graves, but in pauses. If I ever make it home, I want to remember how light sounded on his skin." I blinked, the page blurred. He looked down. "I don't know why I wrote that." "I do," I said softly. "Why?" "So you'd know you were never the only one listening." What came after? We didn't talk more that night. Just sat close, the letters between us like old bones of a story that didn't need to be told all at once. At some point, I leaned my head against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt his breath steady. And when I finally fell asleep there beside him, warm, open, resting without armor, I realized something profound. There is a kind of love that grows not in fire, but in quiet permission, and maybe, just maybe, we were learning how to hold it. That morning, when I woke, the sun was rising. The fire was out, but the room was still warm. Elias wasn't there. But on the table was a single page from the box. It read, "Today, I let someone rid me, and I didn't break." Chapter 7, The Architect and the Ashes. The cliffs above Crescent Bay weren't on any tourist map. They rose at the far edge of the coastline, past the dunes, past the sea glass paths, past the broken fences where the town forgot to care. They were quiet and wind-bitten. Wildflowers grew between stones. The sky seemed wider there. I didn't take anyone with me until Elias, the invitation. I asked him the next morning when the light was soft and the tide low, "Come walk with me," I said. He didn't ask where, just grabbed his coat, nodded once and followed. We walked without words. Our boots brushed sand and thorn. Gulls called overhead like scattered thoughts. The town shrank behind us until it looked like something remembered from a dream. At the edge, at the highest point of the cliffs, we stopped. From there you could see everything. The half-built house in the distance, the curve of the bay, the path we had taken. Elias stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes on the horizon. "Beautiful," he said. I nodded. "I used to come here with Luca when we were kids." He looked at me, waiting. I sat on a rock, pulled my knees up to my chest. And finally, I said the thing I hadn't said out loud in years. The ashes. I didn't go to the funeral. Elias didn't respond. I kept going, quietly. I couldn't. I was living in Prague, working on a restoration project. When I got the call, it was already over. They'd buried what they had. I missed everything. I bit my lip. I told myself it was because of the flight, the time, the clients. But the truth is, I swallowed. I was afraid if I saw his grave, I'd have to believe he wasn't coming back. The wind caught my hair. The sea thundered far below. Elias said, after a while, "Did he know you loved him?" "Yes," I said, but I never said it enough. Letting go, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a small ceramic urn, no bigger than my palm. "I've been carrying this for 2 years," I whispered. "Not all of him, just a little." I told myself I'd know when it was time. Elias stepped back, gave me space, not pushing, not fixing, just there. I knelt near the edge, unscrewed the lid, let the wind take the ashes. They spiraled upward, caught in a gust, and vanished into the sky like memory made light. I didn't cry, not until Elias knelt beside me and said, so gently it almost broke me, "You didn't miss the goodbye. You're just saying it now." The cliff and the architect, we sat there a long time. He asked about Luca. I told him how he used to hum when he cooked, how he believed in sunrooms, how he wrote terrible poetry and left it under my pillow when I was sad. "I'm afraid to finish the house," I admitted. "Why?" "Because it'll mean he's really gone." Elias looked out over the sea. "I think finishing it means he gets to stay." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He turned to me. "Every time you open the front door, every time light pours into that sunroom, every time you live there, he stays." The walk back. We walked slower on the way back. Something softer between us now. Not absence, not even comfort, but recognition. At one point, Elias stopped and picked up a smooth white stone shaped like a heart. He handed it to me without a word. I held it the rest of the way home. That evening, I hung Luca's photo above the fireplace, lit a candle beneath it, and wrote, for the first time since his death, a letter to him. Not to grieve, but to thank. Elias came by later with soup and no expectations. We sat at the kitchen table and said nothing for a long while. Then, without asking, I reached out and took his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just held on, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in my own story. Chapter 8, Moonlight Between Two Windows. It began with darkness. Not metaphorical, just actual, full blackout darkness. The wind had picked up around sunset, and by the time I lit the third candle in my kitchen, the entire town had gone still. No hum of electricity, no porch lights, just the sound of the ocean breathing and branches tapping the windows like questions. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't used to it either. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your ribs and reminds you how alone you are. Until the knock came. 3 soft taps, like he already knew I'd be waiting. Elias in the dark. He stood on my porch holding a flashlight and a loaf of bread. "They said we'll be without power till morning," he said. "I have candles," I replied. "And I have soup." I smiled. "Come in." He stepped into the glow like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. He set the bread on the table and pulled the thermos from his coat. We might as well wait out the dark together. I nodded. I didn't say, "Please stay." I didn't have to. The candlelit dinner. The kitchen glowed gold. We sat across from each other, the soup between us steaming gently. Mismatched bowls, the fire crackling softly in the corner. The candles flickered with every breath, and his shadow danced along the walls like something from an old story. We talked about small things. The weather, the strange shape of Crescent Bay's coastline, the fact that I still couldn't bake without burning the bottom. He laughed at that. A real laugh. Warm, whole, rare. And I realized I would do just about anything to hear it again. After the fire. When the fire died down, we didn't move. The room was dim now. Only 2 candles left, their wax puddling slowly. "I like your house in the dark," he said. "Why?" It feels honest. I turned to him. He wasn't looking at me, just watching the flame. Lights hide things, he added, but in the dark, you can see what matters. I said nothing, just listened to the hush between our breaths, the moment. I didn't know how it happened. 1 second we were across from each other. The next, we were side by side on the couch. Our knees touched. His hand rested on the cushion between us, open. Still, not quite inviting, but not closed either. I let mine drift closer, and eventually, gently, we touched. Just fingers, just lightly. But in that single contact, there was something unmistakable. A beginning, not fast, not fiery, but steady, like the tide, midnight. The power didn't come back, but neither of us mentioned leaving. I fetched him a blanket. He took the couch. I took the bed. We said goodnight in the doorway like something holy was passing between us. He didn't kiss me. I didn't ask him to. But the moment lingered, just long enough for me to want it. The moonlight. I couldn't sleep. The wind had died down, but my heart hadn't. I rose from the bed and padded barefoot through the hallway. The whole house was silver lit, the moon casting shadows through the windows like ink stains on a letter never sent. I found him sitting up, blanket around his shoulders, staring out the window. Couldn't sleep? I asked. He shook his head. Too quiet. Too quiet for what? For forgetting. I stood beside him, and together, in the moonlight between two windows, we just breathed. No words. He didn't touch me again, and I didn't reach for him, but something passed between us, like a note slipped beneath a door, not opened yet, but understood. Something tender, something patient, something real. That morning, the power returned just before sunrise. Lights flickered on. The fridge hummed back to life, but the moment we shared, in the hush of shadows, in the soft rhythm of nearness, stayed untouched. He poured us coffee like nothing had changed, but I think we both knew everything had. Chapter 9, a glimpse of what could be. It was the kind of night made for stories. The sky was cloudless, sharp with stars. The town square shimmered with string lights and handmade lanterns, glowing gold and amber like captured fireflies. Music floated through the air, fiddle and guitar, laughter, and the clink of wine glasses. The Midsummer Festival had always been small, intimate, a way for Crescent Bay to remember itself before the summer crowds arrived. I hadn't planned on going, but Nora, the cafe owner with the sea gray curls, had insisted. Even grief needs a night off, she'd said, handing me a ribbon to wear around my wrist. So I went, and when I arrived, Elias was already there. Seeing him in light, he was leaning against a lamppost, a cider bottle in hand, talking to one of the local fishermen, a man twice his age, laughing with wide gestures. And Elias, he smiled, not the half-curved mouth I was used to, but a full, relaxed smile, the kind of smile that made him look years younger, like someone who hadn't seen war or silence or loss. I stood frozen for a moment, watching him. I had always seen him in shadow. Now suddenly, I saw the man in light, and it did something to me. Lanterns in motion. People floated between booths, kids darted with sparklers, music pulsed under our feet. Elias spotted me, nodded, no words. But when I reached him, he handed me a cup of cider. "You clean up well," I teased, motioning to his rolled sleeves and slightly mussed hair. "You clean up," he said back, just as softly. Period. I flushed and pretended not to. A dance avoided. There was dancing, of course. A circle formed in the square. Fiddles called to feet. Couples spun and laughed, lantern light casting swirling shadows. "Do you dance?" I asked. "Only when no one's watching," he said. I smiled. Then we're both out of luck. But we didn't step in. Instead, we watched, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough not to get lost in it. And that somehow felt more intimate. Then came the stranger. Her name was Anya. Tall, Scandinavian accent, visiting artist. She'd been introduced to Elias earlier that night by someone from the Historical Society, Now, as I stood beside him, I watched her walk toward us, eyes bright, lips red, smile effortless. She touched his arm lightly, spoke with easy familiarity. And when Elias laughed, just once, something sharp flickered beneath my ribs. I hadn't expected it. Jealousy, small, but unmistakable. A shift. Anja leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear. Elias nodded politely, but he wasn't smiling anymore. He glanced sideways at me, and in that single look, something passed between us. Not explanation, not apology, just awareness. I see you. I feel this too. After she left. She wandered off eventually, swept into conversation by someone else. I stayed quiet. He didn't fill the silence. Then he said quietly, "She's not who I stayed for." I looked up. "What?" He met my eyes. I was going to leave this place after the first week, just fix a few roofs, then disappear. And he looked at me. "You made it hard, almost." The words hung there, between us, bare, true. I could feel my heart pushing against my ribs like it wanted to be said. "Then don't leave. Then stay for me. Then let this be real." But I said nothing, not yet. Because sometimes the right thing needs silence before sound. The walk home, he offered to walk me back. We passed lanterns still swaying, strings of laughter in the distance. The night was softer now. The town glowed behind us like a memory we hadn't made yet. At my gate, he stopped, didn't ask to come in, didn't need to. His hand brushed mine, and in the hush of the street, I turned toward him, heart open, breath held. We didn't kiss, but something in our eyes did. Something said, soon. That night, I stood in the window long after he left, watching the lanterns die out. The house felt full, not of ghosts, but of hope. And maybe that was scarier, because hope meant I could still lose something, but it also meant I could have something, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted it. Chapter 10. The First Touch of Flame. The storm came fast, not a whisper of rain, not a gentle warning, but a sudden rush, black clouds crawling across the sky like ink spilled too wide. I was in the studio when it hit, sketches curled at the corners. The wind howled through the eaves. A tree branch slapped against the window so hard I thought the glass would shatter. And then, water. Not from above, but below, from the floor. Seeping through the wood, dark and cold, rising faster than I could register. Panic. The drainage system had failed. The lower studio, Luca's dream room, my work sanctuary, was flooding. I tried to move everything, papers, charcoal, the blueprints. My feet slipped, my hands trembled. A box of drawings fell into the water and bled ink like wounds opening. I was alone, or at least I thought I was, until I heard the door bang open. Elias arrives. He didn't speak. He just strode through the rising water in soaked boots and took the pile from my arms. He set it on the table behind me, out of reach. Then he turned to me. "Go upstairs," he said. "I can't leave it." "Sophia," he said, voice steady but sharp. "Go. I'll handle it." I froze, not because I was afraid, but because hearing him say my name like that, my full name, was the first time I felt it in someone else's mouth like a lifeline. The rain and the rescue. Together we moved quickly, salvaging what we could. The water kept rising. Wind screamed against the glass. Lightning cracked somewhere over the bay. We worked like one being. His hand braced my back when I slipped. My fingers brushed his as we passed things back and forth. Neither of us spoke about anything except the moment, but when the worst passed and the water began to slow, and we stood in the wrecked room, soaked to the bone, chest to chest, everything changed. The kiss. It wasn't planned. There was no build-up speech. No confessional monologue, just a pause, a breath, a silence wide enough to fall into, and then his hand came to my cheek, gentle despite the storm, and he looked at me like I was the only thing worth staying for in a ruined world. Then he kissed me, not with hunger, not with desperation, but with certainty, as if this had always been the answer, as if we had always been moving toward this moment, word by word, silence by silence. What it meant, it wasn't perfect. Our lips were cold. My fingers were trembling. His jacket was soaked and smelled like rain and cedar and something heartbreakingly safe. But in that kiss was everything we hadn't said. I see you. I choose you. Let me stay. When we pulled apart, he didn't ask. I didn't speak. We just looked at each other, eyes wide, lungs full of storm air. And I knew, this is the moment I'll measure everything else against. The after. He helped me upstairs. We peeled off wet clothes, not with lust, but with care, like soldiers undressing wounds. I changed into a dry sweater. He lit the fire. We sat together in its glow, wrapped in the same blanket, not touching now, but knowing. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, we had already weathered the harder thing, letting each other in. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. For the first time in years, I felt still, whole, held. Elias slept beside me on the couch, arm bent above his head, brow furrowed even in rest. And I whispered, just once, into the dark, please stay. I don't know if he heard. But in the morning when I opened my eyes, he was still there,